to try and remember to ask questions into the mic if you have them. That would be fantastic. And welcome. My name is Matt. This is Amy. We were here last week to talk about eating, and we'll be here next week to talk about faith and what does parenting in the context of faith look like. And so we are super excited to be here today and talk about discipline. These are our three boys. They are now 22, 21, and 15. And the picture on the left was a Christmas card photo with science fair medals as their bling. So
and pony bead necklaces.
Yeah. And so let me just say that we're really here out of humility, and that we're I don't know that we're experts as much as we're just old, and we have some things figured out by experience and by a lot of trial and error. So we want to share some things, but please know that we don't certainly have all the answers and don't want to pretend to. Yeah.
And one thing that we want to keep coming back to as we talk about parenting and just intentional approaches to parenting, that the most important thing you can do for your children is to work at deepening and strengthening your marriages. That as our marriages flourish, our capacity to parent grows. And so we really want to encourage you to be mindful of that as we talk about parenting, that falling in love with your spouse as father or mother in that role and getting to know them in that way, I think is one of the greatest gifts of being a parent. And we just really want to encourage and exhort you towards that end as well, in addition to talking about what it is to be a parent. Okay, we can go to the next slide. We had a couple of questions. On your tables, there's little pieces of paper. If you want to jot down questions for us, we will look at them and we'll bring them in next week or figure out a way to talk about them.
So the first one about spanking, we're going to definitely talk about later, so we'll get to that here in a bit. So stay tuned on that.
And the second one, with talking about food and eating, the idea of the difference between food as celebration and food as reward. And we talked about this, Matt and I did, as we kind of looked at how we did it at our house. And I think the idea with reward, it is a cause and effect thing. It is something that is earned and expected. A celebration is a rhythm. And I think that would be a way to think about food in that way. Food is very much a kind of a unifying thing in the Bumpus house, whether it is we eat vegetables with our fingers, kind of regardless of where we are, or we love now with all our boys to go out to eat to a nice dinner. That's something we really love doing. Or we love buying everybody his or her own pint of ice cream. And then that's a Friday night and Saturday night event, is everyone getting their own pint of ice cream and enjoying it that way. So the idea of, with celebration, it's something that we do for the purpose of joining together, and that that's kind of how we look at the difference between those two things.
All right, Josh. And so just a couple of things that we talked about last week that I want to revisit, we want to revisit and catch you up to speed if you missed, and because they're relevant today again. And so we're going to talk a fair amount about the idea of what is known as autonomy support. So to guide our kids, to coach them up towards autonomy. And autonomy is not separateness, it's not independence, it is being my own self, and Amy being her own self, and ultimately that is, we think, pretty foundational for them making good choices, is that sense of autonomy and kind of being their own person. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that today, and especially in the context of structure versus control, and that as we think about discipline, one of the main principles for us is how do we provide structure that is in the context of allowing autonomy and fostering the ability for our kids to make their own choices. So we're going to really break this down quite a bit this afternoon. So hold on to those two ideas as we move forward.
When you think about discipline, what do you think of? What jumps into your head? Spanking. What else?
Often harshness.
Harshness. Okay. Time out. Okay. Yeah, reactions. What about degree of confidence? I feel really confident in the system of discipline we're using in our home currently. I feel okay about the system of discipline too. Oh dear. Where, and that can be like a moment by moment reality.
Can you tell Amy teaches 7th grade? This is her rating
sorry,
scale
yeah,
all the time.
I spend all day with 12
I
and
love
13
that
year
rating
olds.
scale.
We do, it's a thermometer. You all came with one today. And so thank you for that. Okay, we can go on to the next one.
We talked last time about how there's not a lot of direct biblical wisdom about feeding your kids well, but there certainly is about discipline. And just to highlight a couple things, verses that we have clung to over the years, and we would encourage you to do the same. We know from that Proverbs verse that there is evidence of loving our kids when we discipline them, right? That if parents who love are disciplining, and that those go hand in hand. We know from the second verse, all discipline seems painful, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. That there is fruit to be had. There is righteousness on the horizon when we are disciplining our children well. And then the third one from Ephesians: don't provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Read a little bit of John Piper writing about this verse, and he talked about that discipline in that context as kind of how do we help our kids live the life that they've been called to live by God, and how do we help them experience the positive and negative consequences of doing so, or maybe falling short in doing so, like we all do. And then instruction, that correcting and guiding that we provide along the way. So we know that discipline matters, right? We know that it's important. We know that it's good for our kids. We know that we are called to love and show our love for them in this way. The trick is, well, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis or on a year-to-year basis? How do we do that? What does that look like? And that's something that we've wrestled with for a long time. You guys are wrestling with, or will wrestle with, and so we kind of think of these verses as a foundation, as a starting point. But then, what does it look like to put some context to that in our everyday lives?
And I think because the word discipline is a word that gets used in a lot of different contexts, I would encourage us to think about discipline and training. When we are operating in disciplining our children, that we're really operating from a posture of training them. And so that if we look at it that way, that I think gives us a good pathway in. Okay. So this is one way to define discipline. How do I get my kid to do what I want him or her to do? And you'll notice that that's a pretty parent-centric way of thinking about discipline. And what ends up happening when we have that parent-centric approach is that we have a pretty high level of parental control and parental responsibility for the kid's behavior. And that is where things can be really challenging, and they can kind of fall apart. That when we have it parent-centric, that is not consistent with an autonomy supportive way of training our children. That is a very us-centered way. This is a really easy mindset to fall into because we've got so much invested. These little humans matter to us more than anyone except the person who we're married to, that they matter so much. So we have a high level of investment. And so when we carry just that real strong sense of that feeling responsible, it really is easy to slip into this model. And what we'd like to do is encourage you to kind of view this in just a little bit different way in terms of when you think about discipline. All right, next one. And this would be the thing that we would encourage you as you think about decisions and workings with your kids instead, is that how can we structure, so the emphasis here is structure, kid, choices. And that if you approach that training of your child from that posture, that really is going to put you on a path where you are supporting your child developing autonomy, that you are acknowledging and supporting your kid kind of as their own person. The younger the child, the higher the levels of support. The older the child, the supports get farther and farther back and shorter. Like if you think, I was thinking about, I don't know much about planting trees or things, but like I know when you plant a tree, you plant it and it's brand new, and you put those sticks in the ground and you tie the tree close, and you've got a lot of support for that tree. But over time, those supports get moved away. The rope gets looser. They ultimately get taken down. And if parenting if that could be an analogy for parenting, that's kind of when they're brand new, there are an awful lot of parental supports, and that the older they get, the less and less that happens.
And one distinction is that when we talk about structure, we're not just talking about limits or about confining, but that if I want my kid to make good choices at the grocery store, I probably shouldn't take him or her to the grocery store when they're starving, right? Like there's a structure there that is important, that really gives freedom, and so structure's there's a bigger picture here than just limits.
There is, and one thing that I think is really, all of you are parenting pretty young children, and I think this is a really sweet time to start thinking about this, that idea of moving towards autonomy support, where the things you are inviting them into being autonomous about are still pretty low stakes. That this is a pretty scary move, because ultimately your kid gets autonomy. They leave your house, as two of ours have, because they grew up. That they ultimately, autonomy happens whether you're ready for it or not. And how sweet to begin laying the foundation and developing ways to think and ways to choose, while the choices they're making are, am I going to hit my brother on the head with this truck or not? And that is that's pretty low stakes.
Maybe not for the brother.
Not for the brother. Very true. No, that's good.
All right, Josh. So what we'd like to do this afternoon is just to kind of use as the foundation of our time together to really think about the difference between structure and control, and to try and leave you with some specifics around that. And please don't hear us say that you should never control and always provide structure, because that is not realistic. Sometimes we need to control our kids' behavior, and that's true when they're 15. But how do we provide more structure and less control? Why is that a good idea? And in our opinion, and how do we do that? What does that look like? So we'll walk you through just a kind of few basic principles, and so the first one is consistency, right? That as we think about what structure looks like, to be consistent in our parenting is pretty foundational.
Mm-hmm. The thing that consistency does is it builds trust. It shows our children that they can trust us. It shows that I will follow through. I will always mean what I say. And what I say is going to happen is going to happen. That I am in charge of this environment, not you. That you can trust me on these things, that I promise you I will respond this way to that kind of thing. And that as our kids grow to trust us, when we are recommending for or against a given choice that they're in the position to make, again, with those low stakes choices, that we build trust and rapport with our children, so when they're making those higher stakes choices, we have that rapport, we have that relationship, we have that trust, and I think that pays really big dividends for the kids. I think that them knowing that they can trust mom and dad to their wisdom, their insight, that really allows us an incredible capacity to speak into our kids' lives as they get older and older.
There's a guy at University of Oregon who for decades has worked with teenagers that are in the juvenile justice system, trying to figure out, okay, what happened? What was it when these kids were 2, 3, 4, 5? If we trace things back, what does that look like, and how do we help? And that's setting the stage for me to say that if you ever do this, your kids will be juvenile delinquents. That's not what I'm saying. Please hear me not say that. But it's really interesting. And one of the things that he identified was this pattern in these families, again, of these delinquent kids when they were little, was what he called the negative reinforcement trap. And so what you'd see is, this pattern of, and so let me back up. So negative reinforcement means it's something that gets removed, and it is increasing the likelihood of that behavior happening again. Right? So your kid gets straight A's and comes home and you're like, wow, that's great. You know what? As a thank you, I'm gonna do your chores today. I'm gonna do the dishes for you today, just to say thank you. But there might be a motive there too to say, all right, now if you get good grades, I'm gonna do the chores, right? So maybe that will increase the likelihood of getting good grades in the future, right? So removing something negative with the goal, or sometimes the unstated goal, of that thing happening in the future. And what happens sometimes is that it's unintentional. And so when my kid is in his room and the room's messy, and I come by and I say, you need to clean your room now. And he says, no. No, clean your room. No. Clean your room. No. All right, you've got to clean your room right now. No, I'm not going to. No. And I say, all right, fine. Well, you just have to live in this total squalor then. And I walk away. And what this guy at University of Oregon says is you got to be really aware that interaction is negatively reinforcing for me, it's negatively reinforcing for my kid. That for me to walk away in that moment is, I've gone from conflict, okay, peaceful, right? That act of him resisting has been taken away. It's negatively reinforcing for me. And I, as a parent, learn if I back off after I make a demand, I get peace and quiet. And the kid is negatively reinforced also. They learn resist. Dad's going to eventually give in. If I keep resisting, he's not going to nag me anymore. And they're negatively reinforced. So the nagging gets removed for the kid. The resisting gets removed from me, and we both, in essence, are learning this pattern. I'm gonna demand something, he's gonna resist, I'm gonna back off, it's peace and quiet. And in essence, in these kids, what they would find is that the kid ends up kind of running the house at age 5, 4, because there's not consistency there. The parents are not meaning what they say. You want to see the negative reinforcement? Go watch. Anybody ever work at a grocery store? Like you go watch the checkout counter. Hey, I want M&Ms, Mom. No. M&Ms. No. M&Ms. No. M&Ms. All right, fine. Here. That's the same kind of thing, right? We've all done it. Or again, this is not. We're not expecting perfection, but there is an element of when we're training our kids that what we say is not what we mean. We're often leading to challenges down the road.
That negative reinforcement thing can be so challenging. That what am I teaching my kid about asking for M&Ms or asking for apple juice? Can I have this? Can I have this? Can I have this? Can I have this? And I keep saying no, until finally I'm like, I need you to just stop talking. So I will do whatever it takes to make you stop. And and I end up teaching them that that my no doesn't mean a no. That I end up eroding my child's trust in me. That I remove my authority. I actually just kind of hand it over to them. And so that trap is such an easy one to fall into because it happens. The opportunity for it to happen, especially with young, like 2, 3, 4-year-olds, it happens like 40 times a day. And that's on a good day. Like, I know, yeah, it really does. And so, because they are relentless. And as you are kind of establishing this pattern that when I say no, it means no, boy, that is some work. That is some big work.
So we showed you this term just a few minutes ago, but autonomy support, we want to kind of give you a little more meat there in terms of what that means and how do we parent in ways that support our kids' autonomy, and that's regardless of whether they're 2 or 22. So one of the aspects of autonomy support is that there's conversation, there's choice when it's appropriate, and kids end up feeling like they have a say in what happens to them. They have a voice, and that's not to say that they're in charge, absolutely not. It's not to say that we're soft or easy on them, absolutely not. But what can we do to make them, to give them a context where they feel like they have a say in who they are and in the choices that they're making about their own life? Really, I think the best way to illustrate this is we have just a kind of a few examples of times where we've somehow miraculously remembered some of these autonomy support principles and put them into action. We also have lots of stories of times when we didn't. So these are us kind of at our best, maybe. So please hear us say that it's not always like this. But
so our son Scott at 3, I was just talking with someone, 3-year-old little boys are forced to be reckoned with. And our Scott was a force to be reckoned with. Delightful human being, but he was a force. And I don't remember why, but he needed a timeout. And timeout was the mode of discipline that we used with our boys all there growing up. And he needed a timeout. And the expectation that had been clearly taught and stated was that for a timeout, you have to sit quiet and still. And Scott was not in a space where he was going to sit quiet and still. So I would put him in the timeout chair, I would turn and walk away, he would get up and follow me, still ranting about whatever it was that he was being punished about. And I would pick him back up, sit him back down. And we repeated this, and finally I said, your job right now is to sit in this timeout chair. Are you going to pick to sit here, or do I need to buckle you into the timeout chair? And he's like, I'll sit here. And then he didn't. And so I got a belt. We had this wide oak chair that had arms, and I got a belt, and I belted him around the chest, tightened it up, not too tight, but snug. And, just a small one. And I belted him into the timeout chair, which infuriated him. He was so angry, and he just went ballistic. And I walked away, and I came back and I said, do you not like having the belt on? And I said, no. And he said, no. Okay, if you don't want the belt, what do you have to do? Sit quiet and still. He's just tantruming because he knows that you have to sit quiet and still. Can you choose to sit quiet and still? And he said that he could. I took the belt off. He continued to get up. And this was probably a 40-minute ordeal of just, and when he was belted, I said, you picked this. You have this belt on because you chose not to stay in the chair. Mommy doesn't want you to be belted in. Mommy wants you to be a big boy and sit there like you're supposed to. If you can't do that, then you're picking to have the belt. This is your choice. You picked this. Do you like your choice? No. Do you want to choose differently? And it was that over and over and over again of when he was miserable, reminding him that he picked misery. I had something better for him. You sit here for a minute and a half. That's all I'm going to sit you here for. This is not a big deal. You sit here for a minute and a half and then we're done. You're the one that is embracing misery, and I am going to allow you to continue to choose misery until you choose well. That this is how it works, and so it was that pattern of, and I would be really clear. You picked this belt. I am putting this belt on not because I want to, not because I like it, but because this is what your actions told me you needed. If your actions can tell me you don't need this, I will happily take this off. And so that's kind of our timeout with a 3-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah, Tyler.
How did you interact with that when you got home? Like, did you sit down and have a conversation?
Oh, good.
Question was,
Yeah.
repeat that, Tyler.
How did you interact with that when you got home? I'm assuming you were off.
I was
away
off
from the home
at work.
And so you came home and you heard about this ordeal that your wife
Right.
had with your 3-year-old.
Right.
Did you just, awesome, good job, and interact at all, or what did you do?
So I would go to Scott and say, hey, sounds like you made a bad choice in that in what happened, and what did you learn from that? And at 3, you're not getting a lot of deep knowledge, deep learning, but tell me about what happened. Have the kid replay. What happened? How'd that go?
What would you do differently next time?
Yeah. So not just to say, hey, Amy, good job, but which is important, right? But also to say to the kid, tell me about that. What'd you learn? And that's a way that, when one of us is kind of in the mix and the other's off at work or somewhere else, that we can support each other, not just in providing that for Amy, but in letting our kid know, hey, I'm on Mom's team here. Mm-hmm. I really agree with what she did, and I want to talk to you about it. And I hope you know that I know what happened, and I think I think your mom did a really good job, and what'd you learn? Yeah.
Mom and dad on the same team is a phrase that got repeated a lot at our house. As our boys got older, it was, well, I like him better than I like you. That really making it clear, I will always pick him over you, always, because he's my favorite. You, I adore. I'm so glad you're here, but he's my number one. And that idea of, and one small thing that we did was in terms of really reinforcing to them that mom and dad are on the same team. When we walk places, when we sit places, it's the two of us, and then they fill in the margins. That it's only if someone's having a really bad day do they get to sit in between mom and dad. That it's always us and then them.
One of the things you hear in that anecdote with a 3-year-old, right? Even at 3, there's this phrase that we've said hundreds of times to them over the years in different contexts, different ways, different language. But at the core is what kind of kid do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Do you want to be a big boy? At 3, do you want to be a big boy that sits quietly in timeout? No? Okay. Well, then you're going to get buckled in, and you'll be here for an hour. A little older, when we would have battles around homework. And they said, I don't want to do my homework. And the tendency, my tendency at least, is to be controlling. Well, no, you have to do your homework. And that's where I lean towards control. But the reality is, I can't make them do their homework if they don't want to do their homework. I can't make them. So we really learn to lean into that and to say, okay, fine, don't do your homework. That's fine. In fact, I'll call your teacher tomorrow, and we'll get an appointment scheduled, and I'll let your teacher know that you're not going to be doing homework anymore, and we'll see how that goes. That's fine. And they just look horrified. No, I'm not. I don't want that. No, that's it's fine. That's what you told me that you wanted. Well, no, that's not what I want. Well, what do you want? What kind of kid do you want to be? What happens when you don't do your homework? Well, I have to stay in from recess. Oh, okay. So, okay, you can choose to stay in from recess. That's fine. When I get out of the way in terms of control, I'm going to provide some structure. I'm going to make sure they know, well, what are the consequences if I don't do my homework? You know, I mean, they know, right? They know what happens. I can't make them, but I can make them very aware of what those consequences are of the choices that they make. And to remind them, okay, you want to be the kind of kid that doesn't do his homework. That's fine. Yeah, go for it. There's a little bit of ego that has, in my part, that has to step out of the way and be like, okay, how do I feel about the teacher knowing that my kid isn't doing the homework, right? So to get out of the way and to look for those places where I can let them choose in the context of being aware of those choices and the consequences.
There was one boy at one point who was ranting and raving and tantruming about having to do homework who actually lost the privilege of doing homework. That he was having such a meltdown over being mad that he had to do his homework. We said, I'm sorry, you may not do your homework tonight. You have lost the privilege of your homework. And we took his homework away, and that was the end of his, and it was time for him to go to bed. And then, of course, he desperately wanted to do his homework, which is what we wanted. But we were like, no, absolutely not. You may not put our family through the misery of listening to you tantrum about something like third grade homework. No, absolutely not. You have lost that privilege. Deal with the consequence tomorrow when you get to school. Good night. Yeah, Josh.
If there's already a consequence to in this case you're talking about homework, but it could be anything. So if there's already a natural consequence, do you stack consequences? In other words, do you have a at-home consequence and then a away-from-home consequence? So Brendan chooses not to do his homework, which means he's not going to have recess the next day, but he might be okay with that if it's raining. So, like, do you continue to stack those consequences? Like, well, we'll go talk to your teacher. We'll go, this might look bad, but it's your deal. And then he continues to have all of the normal life at home, or where does that cycle?
I think that what you said, where he's okay with the consequence, if the kid's okay with the consequence, that's when you stack. That the goal here is when they choose in a way that you know because of wisdom and because of the goal that you have for your kid, that they've chosen badly, and they're like, yeah, I'm cool with that, then that's where your job is to help them not be cool with that bad choice.
This is more, is it on? Just talk? Okay. More a reflection than a question, but when you said, like, you pick this misery, not me, I love that because we're trying to teach Harper, like, our sin is when we think we know better than what God knows best for us. So you guys might get to this later in a more sort of theological, philosophical view, but I love that because that's teaching that you chose this and this is what's separating you from doing what you want to do. This is what's putting you there. So I hope you guys talk more about that maybe, but I love that idea that I want better for you. I want something different. And I see something better for you, and this is what you're choosing. What I have is for you to get out of the chair. What God has for us is so much better than what we could choose.
Next week.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think too that as we started because when we were doing this when our boys were little, we did not know the term autonomy support. We were doing that, but we didn't have a word for it. But I think as we kind of looked at this, and God is the ultimate autonomy support person, like that is. And so I think that as we've prepared all of this, I've come to a new appreciation and understanding of God as Father. And I think that has been, I've appreciated that opportunity to look. Okay, and about the hour in the timeout chair, he was not buckled in the whole hour. I am relentless and crazy, but not that bad.
But it was
over an hour of me going in. Are you ready to sit quiet and still? Yes. Him not, me back. So yes, but it was exhausting. I will say that. An example of what this autonomy support and this looks like when we're dealing with older kids. We had one of our boys say, hey, I am going to go out with my girl tonight, and I think we're going to go to Krugel Park, and we're going to stargaze. You're going to stargaze. So you're
Stargaze
going to
in air quotes there.
take
Yeah.
a blanket and lie on the ground in the dark with your girlfriend. That's what you're going to do tonight for your date. Well, yeah. I said, okay. So you've told me that you believe and you embrace the idea that God has ideas and opinions about what our physical relationships should look like outside of marriage. And is that a truth that you're still holding on to? Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, but that is not consistent with lying on the ground in the dark on a blanket with your girlfriend. That those two things don't go together. And so I just need you to think about what do you want to be? What do you want to be true of you? Do you want to be the kind of person who lies on a blanket in the dark with your girlfriend? Or do you want to be someone who's chasing after God's best for you as it relates to your physical relationship? What's it going to be? And in that moment, he was like, oh yeah, okay, I can see where you would think that's a bad idea. He's still not sure that it's a bad idea, but I can see where you'd think that would be a bad idea. Yeah, I guess we'll do something instead. We'll come here and watch a movie. And so that idea of, I'm not telling you no, I'm not taking the car keys, I'm not stepping in and controlling you. I'm saying, this is who you said you wanted to be. Take a look in this mirror. Are you on track?
Because the reality is at 17, if he and his girlfriend have decided, you know what, we're going to start having sex, we are pretty limited in terms of how we can control that behavior. And so, trying to create a vision for here's who you've said you want to be. Does this match? No, it doesn't.
And one thing about autonomy support, whether it's the screaming guy in the timeout chair or the 17-year-old deciding what to do on a date, that this idea of autonomy support allows us to step in at every moment of their process, and it allows the kid to correct course. That Scott is screaming in the chair, I am not happy with the choice I made, and I can go in and say, do you want to make a different choice right now? Yes, I want to make a different choice. And so I can remove the consequence, I can remove the belt, and give him that chance to correct his behavior, to kind of align himself with expectation again. This autonomy support, this kind of constantly putting them in a position of choice, is the younger the kid, I think the more opportunity for choice, because the shorter the consequences are. The older the kid, you go on for longer. The consequence lasts longer. Whatever the consequence may be, but that idea in this way of engaging with our kids and talking with them about choices is that when they've chosen badly and they are miserable, then we can say, are you miserable? Yes. Why? Because you picked badly. Do you want a chance to pick differently? Yes. And then we give them that chance to pick differently, and they can experience that difference of the peace and the harmony and that comes with choosing well versus the misery that comes from choosing badly.
So it sounds like a lot of your discipline revolves around natural consequences. And so how does that work with like grounding and things like that?
Oh yeah, we've definitely grounded kids. There are some circumstances where the consequence is just less natural, right? So the important part of a consequence is, does it feel like a consequence to the kid, right? If we're saying, no, you can't go to recess and the kid hates recess, like, no, that's awesome. All right. And so I think some of this is just kind of giving ourselves permission to be creative about consequences and How can we help kids see the link between their choices that they're making and what happens? And when there are natural consequences that make sense, yeah, we're all in on that. But that's kind of best case scenario too sometimes.
What about the natural consequences that maybe have like a positive reinforcement to them? So say sex for the first time or something like that, and they're like, oh, that was the best thing, like, so I mean, so the natural consequence is not like and maybe because of their upbringing they do feel disgusting or something like that, but there might be an elevated sense of emotion around that one. I'm more looking at the principle, not just the sex conversation.
I think that the older they get, the more they own their choices, and like with that, choosing to go against what God has designed. I think what happens then is that there may be an absence of an immediate consequence, but we all know that there's the presence of consequences later. And so that hopefully we've helped them recognize that even in this moment where there may not be, there is not. And one of our prayers that we've prayed over our boys, and God has been so incredibly faithful, is we've prayed that things would not be hidden, that things in their lives that we need to join them in and address with them, that those things wouldn't be kept hidden. And God has been incredibly faithful to that. And so that would be an opportunity where I would trust that if that were something that would happen with our boys, that it would not remain hidden, and we would get to engage them in conversation with that, and acknowledge that they are their own people who may choose kind of in spite of wisdom and consequence. Yeah.
How would you handle lying? Like, what type of consequence would you give for that? And even as they get a little older, because they're kind of in between.
Yeah.
My oldest is 9.
So with lying,
And that's a good one, because there's not. I mean, that's kind of the natural consequence question, right?
Yeah.
There's maybe not necessarily something that's obvious. Yeah.
I came unhinged when there was lying. One of my, and there are moments in the Bumpus family that kind of go down as Bumpus lore. I canceled my son's birthday party. He lied we did. It was a group decision, and I am kind of categorically opposed to birthday parties, just because I don't know. But I didn't cancel it because of that. But for the first time, birthday parties were rare happenings in our house. And for the first time, we made invitations. They were cute little skateboard invitations. They were darling. We had it all set. We were ready to go with a birthday party. And the kid lied to me about a week before, and we canceled his birthday party.
What was the scale of do you mind giving a little bit more context? Like, was it like, Mom, I did my homework, or was it?
He was supposed to have walked. I was watching a friend's kindergartner, and he was supposed to have walked the kindergartner to our house. There's 2 ways you can get from the elementary school to our house, and he. Instead of walking the way he always walked, he on purpose walked a different way. So he went out of his way to disobey, and then was dishonest. So it was pretty big for the 8 or 9-year-old that he was. So when they lied, that was the flattening kind of event in our world. That yeah.
All right. Are we good? Okay. So just in terms of a kind of another way to think about this, discipline is absolutely not always proactive, but when it can be, I think our lives are enriched by that, meaning that we're creating a context for expectations. We're setting that vision. What kind of kid do you want to be, and ultimately what their goals are, what our goals are for them. The discipline that's in place hopefully allows them in advance to make good choices with an awareness of what what that consequence might be.
This being proactive and being consistent really go hand in hand. So the way that it looked in our world, there were a shocking number of things in our world that became privileges. As the boys got, a towel became a privilege. And if you can't hang up your towel, you've lost the privilege of a towel. Figure out another way to dry off. A bed.
That's pretty gross when you think about it, because then it was like dirty shirts are their towels. So
it was, but one guy lost his bed. He was, I don't even remember why, but we're like, you have lost the privilege of your bed and bedroom, and he had to sleep on the floor, the hallway, and it was hardwood floor. And so it's that, and the way that those things worked, it was always if you, then you will lose this privilege. One guy could not stop using his shirt as a napkin. And so one day we're like, if you use your shirt as a napkin, you will wear a napkin as a shirt. And you'll use your shirt as your napkin. Sure enough, reaches over and we're like, give me your shirt. And he was mortified and angry. We're like, no, we said, if you use your shirt as a napkin, you will put your shirt on your lap and you will wear a napkin.
consistency, right? Yeah.
And that's what we did. And I have to be honest, in this kind of thing, I figure if they're making me miserable by behaving badly, I kind of I'm trying to figure out a way to say this nicely.
Lean into that.
Yeah, I am going to figure out a way to make myself laugh, because I'm so frustrated with you right now, because this is not hard. It is not hard to use a napkin. It's in your lap. And so I'm going to, yeah, you had a question.
So going back to when your child lied to you, did you find out from your child that he lied to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was my question. If they come clean,
Yeah.
how that is different than you finding out another method?
Yeah, there's a little bit of bonus points for owning it, but the reality of the lie is the tone setter.
Yeah. That idea of conversations, as our kids have gotten older, one of the joys has been to have that conversation about, well, what kind of kid do you want to be, not just when they're on the timeout chair or screaming about not wanting to do their homework, but to have that in advance when things are going well. After his freshman year in college, Jonathan had a girlfriend for the first time, kind of girlfriend. And she was going to California for the summer, and he was here. And I said, well, tell me about that. How's that? What's that going to look like? I don't know. I don't know. And I don't know how to do that. And you have these kind of insightful moments that are very fleeting, but once in a while, like everything kind of comes into place. And I said, well, do you want me to help you with that? Well, yeah, I do. I said, okay. Well, what kind of boyfriend do you want to be this summer? Well, I want to let her know that I care about her and she's important to me and that I'm thinking about her and blah, blah, blah. Okay, all right. So later that summer, we're driving to Spokane, he and I, and he gets a Snapchat from her, and she says, oh, I feel horrible. I'm at the doctor's office. I think I have strep throat. And we go on with our day, spend the day in Spokane. We're driving back later that night, and I said, hey, I never heard. What did she hear from the doctor? How's she feeling? And this was his response, verbatim. He says, I don't know. And there was this moment of clarity for me. I'm like, you are an idiot right now. What are you doing? And the clarity was in that conversation, right? The proactive setting the stage. Who do you want to be? I don't care about this girl. I'm not telling you you're an idiot because of anything that I care about. You've said, here's who you want to be. Here's the kind of person you want to be. Here's the kind of boyfriend you want to be. You're not being that. I don't care. Break up with her. I don't care. But if you're not being who you've told me you want to be, you've invited me in to help you with that, I'm going to get to call you out, not because of intrusiveness, not because I'm stepping on your autonomy. No, I'm just coaching you up here. You've invited me, and this is who I want to be. So to try and give him autonomy in that doesn't mean that we're not involved. Doesn't mean that we don't walk alongside them. Yeah, Amy?
I hate to take a step back, but I think it's kind of tied in with this. Like, it seems like you said, like, the natural consequences are great when you can, but sometimes you can't. It seems like the younger the child, the better it is to use a natural consequence, though, right? Because, like, the time delay seems difficult, and so
Yeah, I
it seems
think
like
that's
it's
true.
harder
Yeah.
to come up with some of the natural consequences, like, that aren't just, I don't know, like, threatening, or like Harper talking back. She's like she should be a negotiator for her, like, life. Like, she is a prime negotiator. So how to get her to stop in the moment? Like, I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
this is more.
Well, a lot of
So-
times, like, timeout was our go-to, and there's
Timeout.
not a lot that's natural about timeout sometimes,
Yeah.
right? But it's a removal from the situation and stop and yeah.
I think in that it's that if you then, so I'm going to tell you no, and if you say anything other than okay, Mom, then and we would do a lot of scripting. And say, okay, Mom, and that is a hard. Yeah.
All right, Josh, move us along. Okay, we've got a couple more terms to talk about, but I want to just briefly talk about ego involvement. Like, we all care so much about our kids. We love them. We want the best for them. And yet sometimes that gets in the way of our parenting, of our discipline, when I admit to myself, you know what, my kid being popular is really important to me. Like, my esteem as a parent is wrapped up in his popularity, or whether she makes the varsity team, or, fill in the blank, grades. And we talked about this briefly last week, but when we are ego involved, when our own well-being is wrapped up in our kids' behavior, that makes it a lot easier to be controlling. And we want to watch for that. And for times when our own sense of worth, that was hard to say, our sense of worth, our sense of identity is wrapped up in what our kids are doing or not doing. That can get in the way of us wanting to do things like cancel birthday parties. It makes it sometimes easy to take our eyes off of our goal. What's our long-term vision for our kids in terms of their well-being and their development, and maybe our reputation, our own sense of identity can take center stage, and that's easy to do, but it can be so problematic.
I think that idea of clinging white-knuckled to my goal for my boys. I want them to love Jesus with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. I want them to be people who love well. I want them to grow up and be good husbands and fathers. I want them to love their world well. That's my goal for them. And when I cling tightly to that, and that is the lens through which I view everything, it makes it a little bit, not always, but it makes it a little easier to stop that what will people think. Because sometimes to discipline your kid, to train your kid, you've got to do some pretty outlandish and what looks to the world like mean kinds of things. We had one of our boys just being swaggy, and just they turned out pretty good looking. I mean, I'm their mom, so I'm a little partial. But they're kind of good looking boys, and they show up and they all that and more. And finally we're like, no, we will take your clothes. And there was one boy who had to wear basketball shorts and a t-shirt to school for a week, because we're like, no, I'm sorry, your behavior does not match who God has called you to be, and we are attributing it to this swaggy wardrobe, and we can control that. One guy was on notice, knock it, the swaggy haircut goes, I'll shave your head. That I will damage you in pursuit of my goal. I know it will be hard for you, but oh my goodness, that if he is embracing his identity on his appearance, that's terrifying. I can't, and does that feel borderline abusive? Yes, it does. It really does. Was I actually going to follow through with it? I hope I would have had the courage to. I hope we would have been able to. But I'm the guy that runs the buzzers. But thankfully we didn't. And I think that one of the reasons we didn't have to follow through on that is because we taught our boys when they were little that we will throw down the outlandish consequence from time to time. Don't be surprised. And that's the thing. Like when I say, if you do that, then they know then is an automatic if this happens, that I have gained their trust and respect in that way. The proactive and the low ego involvement, some of you who know me know this story. One of my sons could not touch things when we were in a grocery store. All over stuff. Drove me nuts. And I felt really strongly that they needed to be involved in the grocery shopping, especially with 3 boys. There is a lot of grocery shopping that goes on with that many boys. And so I wanted them to know that the food didn't magically appear. I wanted them to be a part of that process. And so they always went with me to the grocery store when they were little. And we had conversations. If you touch things, there will be a consequence. I had no idea what it would be, but I hit my limit one day. He would not stop touching things. His older brother was with us. Now I've given it away, which it was. It was Scott. So, sorry, Scott. So I'm like, Jonathan, give me your sock. In the middle of Winco, Jonathan is taking off his shoe. This is in California in the summertime. That sock was sweaty. Take off your sock. Give me your sock. I took Jonathan's sock. I looped one hand through the handle of the shopping cart and the other one like this, and I went with the sock, and he couldn't touch anything anymore. Did I look crazy and mean? Yes. Did I say, you picked? I told you to stop touching things. It's not okay to touch everything in a store. That is not socially acceptable behavior. You picked this. And, of course, he's just, and so my tantruming child with his hands handcuffed with a sock, that I do not look like Mom of the Year at all. Or do I? Yeah, or it depends on who you ask. But that idea of, he knew going in, my expectation, enough is enough. You have to learn to control yourself. And for me, it really was an issue of, you are lacking self-control. And your lack of self-control does not line up with my hope of you being someone who loves well. And so I have to help you grow out of this self-control. I have to make you want to learn self-control. Yeah.
When you guys had your outlandish consequences, I guess who made them? Was that normally you, Amy? And then did you always agree with them? Because Tyler's more outlandish than me, and so it's hard for me to get on board. And we always have communicated with each other. If we say that's the consequence, then it has to be something that we're willing to do. So if we say it, it's happening now, whether or not the other person's on board or not. So how did you guys?
That's really wise, right? If we say that's going to be the consequence, then it needs to be the consequence, for sure. Part of it is that I wouldn't have thought to use a sock as handcuffs in Winco. That just wouldn't have come to mind. But so we have very different approaches sometimes, but do we have the same ultimate goal? And do I trust that Amy and I are pointing our kids towards that goal as best as we possibly can? Yeah. So would we always do things exactly the same? No way. But do we have each other's back, and do we, and that's critical, right? So yeah, we would process and brainstorm and think that through a lot. Absolutely.
So then did you guys like preemptively have any of these conversations, like, if this thing ever comes up, here's a good,
we never said, you know what, I'm gonna make sock handcuffs. No, never. But did we talk about birthday party canceling? Is something like a birthday party on the table? Yes, right. That we decided together. So there's the in the moment. I mean, that the Winco thing was more reactive. Right? We had the proactive slide, but that was not something we had nailed down in advance. But did I trust Amy's heart in terms of kind of disciplining our kids towards being a good listener and developing self-regulation? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think too that it's important for the person who is dishing out the discipline be the person that comes up with the idea. Like I think that to expect Matt to parent, because I kind of enjoyed the coming up with the creative. I don't know what that says about me, but that was something that I did really work hard to think, how can I come up with a natural consequence that works? Like that was something I really thought a lot about. And for me to say, this is my idea, okay, now you do that, I don't know that works so well because we're wired so very differently. And so I think that those in the moment decisions, the guy in the moment gets to decide with that, I think.
What about consequences that affect the whole family? Like there have been a couple times where we've told Sawyer, if you don't start listening, then we're not going to go to this event. And that doesn't just affect him, it affects the rest of us. And after the fact, we're like, man, we should think before we say things like that again, because we really wanted to go.
Yeah.
I would avoid that if at all possible, right? Mainly because you're setting yourself up to say something maybe you're not going to follow through with, right? I'm gonna threaten this, but I don't know if we really are going to be okay to pull the trigger on that. And I'd watch for that for sure.
The person that needs to be miserable because of the consequence is the person being disciplined. And so if the consequence is making more people miserable, then, because it might be that the right answer is then we don't go, but let me tell you, the rest of us are going to do something really fun and you aren't. That there were movie nights spontaneously scheduled at our house because we needed someone to not have that privilege. That's why we gave our oldest son a cell phone. We needed currency. We needed something that we could take away. So we gave him a phone, and then we took it away. like days later, I'm not kidding, days later, we're like, oh, happy birthday, Jonathan, here's your cell phone. Oh, I'm sorry, give it back. And because we needed currency. He didn't care about a lot of stuff, and so we figured out what he cared about, and then that became our currency. Next slide.
All right, Josh.
This next slide is another epic Bumpus family story. If you can't read it, so our son Jonathan showed up as a pretty sharp guy. He was identified as a highly capable, gifted kind of kid, and I knew, because I'm a teacher by trade, that kids who show up with a lot of cognitive firepower can also very easily become disengaged, and they can, it's not failure to thrive, what is the right word? There's a word for it, I don't know what it is, but where you don't meet your potential, like you are, I can't think of the word right now. But yeah, so Jonathan was the kid that would not do stuff except until the very last minute, and then because he was skilled, he would get an A. And I knew, and we knew, that that's not going to serve him well. That behavior is disastrous as a husband and a father. And so we would remind him, hey, kid, you got your science fair project coming up. Are you going to do your data collection? You got your science fair. And he's like, I'll do it later. And we said, you understand, if you wait until the day before it's due, we will not allow you to do your science fair project. And if you don't do your science fair project, you don't get to turn 10, because his birthday was a couple days after the science fair. You don't get to turn 10 until you do a science fair project. And so he didn't do his science fair project. The night before, he came up and he's like, okay, I need to do my science fair project. It's due tomorrow. And I said, yeah, here's your question. what happens if you don't prioritize, if you procrastinate and don't prioritize your science fair project. And then we sat with him and talked to him. If you notice, it goes through the scientific method. The material, his materials were video games, his brother. And we taught him, we worked with the scientific method, answering the question, what happens if I procrastinate? And then, I don't know if they still do this at Franklin, but it used to be that you post all of the science fair projects, and so our kid had to, this was the science fair project that got posted in the gym at Franklin. And I can tell you, it was about 70-30, with about 30% of parents being like, oh, that's awesome. And 70% of parents going, you are a horrible parent. And we really had to let go of ego in this decision, because our goal was to create in him a desire to do something in a timely fashion.
And so he's learning, okay, mom and dad mean what they say. They're going to have to, there's going to be follow through. And, oh yeah, by the way, it's going to be painful.
He did.
And I mean, that issue of ego involvement, it has to be the case that we're okay with, I think, that we're okay with something like this. That, wow, what are the other parents going to think? I mean, it's a 4th grade science fair project. Who cares what the other parents think, ultimately? And yet that's a barrier for a lot of us, for sure.
And one thing about my speech pattern that I have to say, I take kind of Matt and I being on the same team and being one so literally that I'll say I did this, and I really don't mean I, like Amy alone. All of these things were us, except for the sock and Winco. That was just in the moment. But all of these kind of larger things, these were all very much things that we thought about together, that we implemented together, that we were unified in and working together. But I use the word more, and it really is a we thing. One thing I wanted to talk about is that idea of the creativity in coming up with the consequences. That is something, if you want to brainstorm creative consequences, I'm your girl. I don't know why, but that is the thought process that I really enjoy. Not because I like to make kids miserable, but because I like to empower them to want to choose well, because if they grow into choosing well, their lives are going to be more peaceful. They're going to be more, that there is more for them. And so that is kind of my heart and motive. And so I was doing some thinking about what kinds of things do I do that kind of sources the creativity and the consequence. And I think that one of the first thoughts that I would think is, how can I make them so miserable in this choice that the best for them is infinitely more desirable? That how can I make you so miserable that you actually want to pick what it is that is the best option here, or the desired option, or the option consistent with the behavior I'm hoping you'll grow into? How can I put you in a position where you are is undesirable, and you want to go to where I'm pointing you? And I think that I think that kind of lines up with what happens with us with sin, that our sin makes us miserable and makes us want to turn away. And so that would be kind of one of the thoughts I would think. And the other is, how can I make my response to their behavior represent the ugly truth of what their behavior is saying? So someone was being particularly mean at our house. Just sarcasm was a language spoken freely in our world, but sometimes it got taken too far, and someone didn't respond when we said, that's too far, you need to switch how you're taking what you're saying. You're not being safe and you're not being kind right now. And the truth of the matter is if you treat people that way, they won't like you. And that was a phrase that we started using when our kids were in elementary school. If you act this way, people won't like you. You're welcome to choose to act that way, just know no one's going to like you. They may stick around for a little while, but they won't for a long term. And that idea of saying, like, if you behave this way, you will lose the privilege of being on the same level of the house as the rest of us. That I'm sorry, you are not behaving in a way that is safe. You cannot be where we are. You are not. This would happen when brothers were going at it, that your behavior has become unsafe for your brother. You are not permitted to be in the same room as your brother at this point. You need to go someplace else. The one right now that we're dealing with, I'm sure this happens in your world too as they get older, that everything they wear is dirty clothes because then they don't have to put it away. And that works fine when laundry is free and it's just right there. And that we have someone who's 2 years away from graduating from high school, and that mode of operation is not going to serve him well. And so we said, look, if it is dirty or you've worn it a couple of times, then it belongs in the dirty clothes. If it's not actually physically dirty, put it away. And if you don't, we're going to go through the laundry baskets and we will pull whatever it is that you have put in that's actually not dirty, and it'll live in our room for a while. And so that idea of, and I'm telling you this, and we sat down and explained, you're going to pay for laundry in 2 years. And you can't, you're 15 now, fine. You can wear something that you pull back out of the dirty clothes because we all know that happens. But you start getting, like your freshman year in college, you'll probably still do that, but there's going to come a point where you can't do that because you'll realize it's gross and your community will tell you it's gross. And so we're going to start now telling you that's gross. You can't behave that way. And so if you want to keep putting everything you wear in the dirty clothes, awesome, but your clothing is going to start disappearing and you won't have many of your favorite things. So that those two principles would be the two that we would use to kind of help frame our reaction, that kind of that natural consequence a little bit more. I don't know. Yeah.
Tell the story about Pack and Play for.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So like one thing that we would do is well, that's kind of consistent with the guy who's getting the consequences, the one who needs to be miserable. So our older two are just under 2 years apart. And when Scott started crawling, it was right at the age where Jonathan started wanting to play with toys that were small and not safe for Scott. And I responded to that. Initially, we had a little playpen thing, and I started initially by putting Scott in the playpen and Jonathan out, and I thought, well, this isn't right. And so we switched, and Jonathan sat in the playpen with the little toys, and Scott had free reign of the house because it was Jonathan he was the one playing with the little toys. And so that idea of looking to see what it is that needs to be managed and really managing. I mean, Scott wasn't happy either way, but at least he wasn't confined in that moment. Yeah.
All right.
We're good.
I think we have like an hour's worth of things to stay still, but we're gonna be done right at 5:30 for the sake of our kids and our child care people. So we're going to kind of skip over this idea, but basically growth mindset is maybe a term that's familiar to you. The idea that we want to focus on effort and that we are none of us is a finished product yet. And what does that mean for us as parents who are interacting with our kids? And so we recognize effort. This is an educational idea originally. The idea that kids are often motivationally they struggle when they are told that they are smart, and that the emphasis is on ability and your kind of who you are as a student. And when we tell kids, "Wow, you're really smart. You're really smart. Wow, you must be really smart," and then things are difficult. That challenges their sense of who they are. And kids who are told that a lot don't try as hard when things are tough. So we want to focus on on the idea that their struggles in terms of behavior do not define them. They are not necessarily their character. We'll skip over this one too briefly, just real briefly. Oh, sorry, Josh. Let me give just 1 minute. There we go. We've used this term before, but to be power assertive is to rely on our own power to get kids to do what we want them to do. We all do this sometimes. And to be low power assertive is to give them choices. It's to give them options. It's to talk about things, to explain, to give them background as much as possible. I want to make sure, though. Last slide. I want to make sure we talk about spanking as a potential disciplinary tool, and a lot of this is a tricky issue, and I know that some of you spank your kids, maybe many of you do, and we never have. It's never felt right for us. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily right for you, but let me give you a little background of why, and just some things to think about, and this is maybe a larger conversation than we have time for, but one of the issues with spanking is that it is power assertive. We spank because of our size and power. To say, Amy, go home and spank Luke, who's 15 and 6'3", is ridiculous. It doesn't work. There's a developmental component to spanking, and sometimes that developmental component means that we rely on spanking at the expense of other forms of discipline that allow for more creativity, that developmentally give us something that we can use down the road when there is an end point to spanking. Some of the guys in my huddle, I was asking them about spanking, and they were like, yeah, I got to the point where kind of inside I would laugh about the fact that my dad was still spanking me, because it didn't really bother me anymore, and also it was way easier than having some other consequence, because they just did it and it was over. If we're issuing a consequence and the kid is old enough to know, I shouldn't let you know that I'm laughing on the inside, because then you won't do it anymore. We got a problem here. So spanking is power assertive. It relies on fear, right? I'm not going to do this because of the potential spanking. And in that, a lot of times, there's the possibility, at least, that spanking minimizes thinking, conversation, other options. In the cart at Winco with your brother's sweaty sock on your hands, or sitting in the chair with you're buckled in and you're screaming because you don't want to do that. Those are consequences that in the midst of the consequence, in the middle of the consequence, the kid can go, all right, who do I want to be? I don't want to be somebody that's screaming and yelling. I can make a different decision. At Winco, are you gonna not touch things now? Yeah. All right, I'll take the sock off. And sometimes there's not that same opportunity for interaction, the same opportunity for choice, for a decision on the part of the kid in terms of who they want to be. Sometimes parents are often pretty ambivalent about spanking. I don't know that I've ever talked to somebody that goes, yeah, you know what I really love to do? It's actually one of my hobbies is spanking my kids. That's kind of weird. And a lot of times we're like, well, I don't feel great about it. And sometimes in that not feeling great about it, sometimes what people say is, well, I want to use it sparingly. And I want to use it for issues that are really important. And I try, and I would say to you that just to push back on that a little bit and to say, well, okay, what you're saying then is I don't really like to spank my kids. I'm not sure it works very well, because if it worked really well, I'd do it all the time. And I'm going to save it for the circumstances that are the most important. And that seems backwards to me. And And there are options that work. And if spanking is something that works well for you, that is working well, great. But for us, at least, it didn't make sense to have something in our back pocket that we would use when the stakes were highest, that we felt the least confident and the most ambivalent about. As I said before, I think it can minimize opportunity for conversation and growth. Anything to add on that? Questions, comments?
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on teaching your kids to take responsibility? My 9-year-old always blames everything on his sister or somebody else, and I try to tell him over and over he needs to take responsibility, but it doesn't seem to soak in or mean much to him. So how did you do that? Or did you even have those issues?
Oh, yeah.
I think the first thing I would start with is pointing out the times where he can take responsibility for the things he's done well. That a lot of times when we don't want to take responsibility for something, it can be an identity thing. That I am, I don't want to take responsibility for doing this thing because it feels really closely tied up with who I am. And so to use words with behavior words, that actions, that would be a thing to go. So this behavior, you did that. That was fantastic. How do you feel about that? Do you feel proud? And then and sometimes when they won't take responsibility, but you know the responsibility is theirs, to say, I'm just going to tell you the truth. This is your responsibility. You behave this way, and it's your responsibility. And if you don't feel that way, that's okay. But I'm telling you the truth. This behavior was your responsibility. I think you're a fantastic human, but you behaved badly in this moment. And that it's probably a process that will take some time, but that separating who I am and what I did would probably be a root of that not wanting to take responsibility. And so I think I would start relentlessly chasing after, in both the positive and the negative, but mostly the positive. I would chase after teasing apart behavior and selfness.
Really?
Yeah, and when you're going for structured autonomy, which I really like, did you have problems either sliding into kind of a laissez-faire situation or also keeping your children feeling like you were available and involved while not being, controlling? Were either of those problems?
Well, I don't think. I think it's a mistake to equate being autonomy supportive with being hands off, and to equate being controlling with being hands on. Right? That we're very involved, very interested in supporting their well-being. So a lot of times making, to say, so one Christmas, how are we doing? It's 5:30. Okay, quick story. One Christmas, our oldest son got a guitar for Christmas. And when you're like 3 and your older brother gets a guitar, there was nothing cooler than the guitar, much cooler than anything you got for Christmas. And you want to play with it, right? And so to be controlling would be to say, well, Jonathan, you need to let your brother play with it. To be autonomy supportive is to say, okay, well, how does it feel when, when you want to play with something and nobody else will share with you? What does that feel like? Can you figure out a way to help your brother play with your guitar a little bit? What might be some ways that you can do that? To me, that's more hands-on, that's more involved. I think it communicates more care than telling my kid what to do. So, yeah, I think we want to be cautious about equating controlling with being involved, because those are fundamentally different things.
it's a lot of goal-oriented conversation. I think that's a lot of the, and so in that I am viewing what they're doing through the lens of what our goal is for them ultimately. With that, yeah.
Are there ever behaviors where you're unsure if this is a negative? You're like, sometimes Chelsea and I look at each other and say, well, do we allow this? For example, our 3-year-old has started speaking with a southern accent. We're like, is this okay? And if not, how do we correct that?
Yeah. So I think to say what are our goals for her, and does this get in the way of those goals? Right? Yeah. I mean, maybe are you guys going to move to Texas or something? Maybe it's support. I'm kidding. So support your. Does it get in the way of your best vision of who God wants her to be? Probably not. At that, that is a source of continual debate and conversation with us. Though, when do we intervene? When do we not? But to try and what's important to us as a family? How do we point kids in the direction of what matters? If it falls outside of that, it's probably an indicator that this probably doesn't matter as in the big picture, in the long-term scope of things.
Yeah.
Carl.
Was there any sort of stages that you went through in parenting, like different ages? I'm thinking about one in particular, like rationalizing with a 3-year-old is sometimes very difficult. Early 3, like, I want pizza. We don't have pizza. I want pizza. Open the refrigerator. There's no pizza. Like we go through the cycle. Like there's
still want pizza.
Yeah, still want pizza. So like so some of the it seems like some of the conversation revolves around logic.
Yeah.
And then it seems like earlier on there is no logic.
Say, if you ask me to have pizza one more time, I'm going to draw you the number of boxes it will be until we have pizza again. One more time. Every time you ask for pizza now, I'm going to put a box on this piece of paper. And you ask again, oh, now it's 2 days until we can have pizza. Oh, right. Now it's 3. Do you want to keep asking? And so and then that's no logic. It's you do this, I do that. If you want me to stop asking for pizza.
And you found that they could still follow the logic of more boxes is more days kind of thing. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is. There definitely is a growth from, part of character at age 3 is just its behavior in a lot of ways, right? And so moving towards, character is moving towards who am I going to be when my mom and dad aren't around? Well, when you're 3, that's not that relevant.
Yeah.
Can we have a Bumpus hotline?
Oh, please.
Well, and then what you do with the boxes is every day say, oh man, I really wish we could have pizza, but you picked. You picked that we can't have pizza. Doesn't that make you sad? Didn't you make a bad choice? And
a little bit of rubbing your nose in a little bit. Just a little bit.
It's kind of how I'm wired.
No, it's good. That's good.
Yeah. Thank you.
We're out of time.
Oh yeah, the feeding pieces of paper are here. If you sign up for one of those, we'll put them on this front table here. Yeah.
It's really valuable.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
People that graciously gave up their afternoon to help with our kids was a huge gift to us. Most of them go to the Todd service that does start in about 20 minutes. So.
Oh yes, sorry. Yay.
Go.